Picture this. It is the dead of night, and you are alone in a tiny kayak, somewhere in the middle of one of the most violent stretches of ocean on Earth. There is no boat behind you, no crew, no engine, just you, a paddle, and more than 1,000 kilometers of freezing black water in every direction. You have been out here for almost a month. Your body is failing. The coast you have bled for is finally close enough to taste, and something in the water is about to go horribly wrong. In 2007, a quiet Australian dad set out to do something the sea had never let anyone do. This is the true story of Andrew McAuley. Now, I'll be honest with you right up front. Parts of this story are stitched together from a garbled radio call in an empty boat. So where the record gets murky, I'll tell you, everything else is exactly as it happened. So let's meet our man, Andrew McAuley. Born in 1968 in Goulburn, New South Wales, he grew into a mild-mannered IT consultant in Sydney, the kind of guy you'd never look at twice. He had a wife, Vicky, an experienced adventurer and paddler herself, and a little boy named Finley, just 3 years old, with a laugh that could power a small city. But under the office shirt was one of the most accomplished adventurers Australia had ever produced. The first non-stop kayak crossing of Bass Strait, a solo run across the Gulf of Carpentaria, 800 kilometers of paddling inside the Antarctic Circle. In 2005, they named him Australian Adventurer of the Year. The man collected impossible things the way the rest of us collect fridge magnets. And there was one impossible thing left that nobody had ever managed: the Tasman Sea. 1,600 kilometers of open ocean between Tasmania and New Zealand. Sailors call it one of the meanest bodies of water on the planet, a place where storms are born and rogue waves come out of nowhere. No one had ever crossed it solo in a kayak without support. Andrew wanted to be the first. Just him, a paddle, and the sea. His vessel was a roughly 6.5-meter Mirage touring kayak, built by a craftsman named Paul Hewitson, modified so Andrew could actually sleep sealed inside the cockpit. And here is the detail I need you to hold on to for the rest of this story. To survive the nights, Andrew designed a strange bulbous canopy, a fiberglass pod he could swing forward and lock over the cockpit like a lid. He painted a little cartoon ghost face on it and nicknamed it Casper. Casper was meant to keep the water out and let the kayak flip itself back upright if it ever rolled over. Remember Casper? Casper matters. There's one more piece of gear worth naming now. An EPIRB, an emergency beacon that could scream his exact location to satellites at the push of a button. Hold on to that one too. So here's the question that's going to haunt this whole story. How does a man this careful, this experienced, with all the right gear, vanish within sight of the finish line? Hang on. We'll get there. In December 2006, Andrew kissed his family goodbye and launched, and he lasted exactly one night. The cold got into the cockpit. Condensation soaked everything, and he realized the setup wasn't ready to keep him alive for a month. So he turned around, went home, and fixed it. Most people would have quit. Our man just took notes. Weeks later, on the 11th of January 2007, he tried again. He slid the kayak into the water at Fortescue Bay on the Tasman Peninsula. Before he left, he filmed himself. And this is the part that'll sit in your chest. Paddling away from shore with tears on his face, he says into the camera, "I'm really worried I'm not going to see my wife again and my little boy, and I'm very scared." And in the background, tiny Finley calls out, "Bye, Daddy." He knew. On some level, he knew exactly what he was paddling into, and he went anyway. The plan was to reach Milford Sound in about 4 weeks. Little did he know how close he'd come. Now let me try to paint what a day out there actually looked like, because it is brutal. Paddle for 10, 12 hours, eat freeze-dried food from a bag. Then, at night, swing Casper forward, seal yourself into a coffin-sized pod, and try to sleep while the whole ocean tosses you around like a cork. No hot shower, no dry clothes, no one to talk to but a video camera. Every single day alone, with the nearest human being hundreds of kilometers away in any direction. For the first couple of weeks, though, the sea more or less behaved. Andrew was ahead of schedule, feeling strong. He had no idea the Tasman was just letting him get comfortable. Then the Tasman remembered he was there. Storms rolled in, winds screaming, waves stacking up into gray walls taller than a house. Andrew got flipped upside down more than once, and each time, Casper did its job and rolled him back up. He was seasick, exhausted, bailing water, losing weight fast. In his footage, he looks hollowed out, older by the day, but he kept the paddle moving, west to east, toward New Zealand. And here is a small thing that becomes a big thing later. That emergency beacon, the EPIRB, was clipped to the boat, not to Andrew's body, to the boat. But hold on, we're not done. Somewhere in that second week, the loneliness starts doing things to a person. Andrew talks to the camera more and longer. He talks about Vicky, about Finley, about coming home. He does the maths on the days left over and over, like a prisoner scratching lines on a wall. This wasn't a stunt for him. It was a mountain that happened to be made of water, and he wanted to stand on top of it and then go home to his boy. That's the whole story, really. And then, after nearly a month at sea, it happened. On the horizon, something solid, gray shapes rising out of the water. The mountains of New Zealand, fjordland, land. After 30 days of nothing but ocean, our man Andrew could finally see the finish line with his own 2 eyes. He was close, achingly, impossibly close. One more push and his name goes in the history books forever, and he gets to hold his family again. And this is where you want the story to end. Triumphant paddler reaches the promised land. Roll credits. But I told you at the start I'd be honest with you. So here comes the part there's no gentle way to tell. I know how this sounds, but there's no honest way to tell it otherwise. It's the evening of the 9th of February, 7:13 at night, New Zealand time, and a radio crackles to life at a Coast Guard station. A voice comes through, barely human, slurred, broken, drowning in static and exhaustion. It says, "This is Kayak 1. I've got an emergency situation. I'm in a kayak about 30 from Milford Sound. I need a rescue. My kayak's sinking. I fell off into the sea." And then, nothing. The operators are stunned. They don't even know who Kayak 1 is at first. There's no formal mayday, no coordinates, just a terrified man somewhere in the dark saying he's in the water. And here's the cruel twist. In the garbled call, he referenced 30. Whether he meant miles, kilometers, or hours was never clear. Either way, he was actually about 67 nautical miles from Milford Sound, well over 100 kilometers from the shore he'd bled for. A frantic search launches into the night. Aircraft, boats, everything New Zealand can throw at the water. They are looking for one man in the dark, in a heaving ocean with almost nothing to go on. They search all night. Nothing. They search into the next day. Nothing. And then, on the evening of the 10th of February, About 24 hours after that broken call, they find it. The kayak. It's floating upside down, partly flooded, but otherwise in near-perfect condition, about 30 nautical miles off Milford Sound. The boat had drifted closer to New Zealand than Andrew ever got. But something was missing. Remember Casper? The canopy Andrew built to keep the water out and roll him upright. Casper was gone, torn clean off. And when investigators looked closer, they found that one of Casper's arms had broken earlier in the voyage, a weak point that made the pod far harder to use when it mattered most. And the beacon, the EPIRB, was still there, clipped to the boat, still working, never activated. If Andrew had triggered it, rescuers could have found him in minutes, but the beacon was on the boat, and somewhere out there, in the dark, Andrew had become separated from the boat. The paddle was there, the satellite phone, the GPS, all of it, sitting in a functioning kayak. Everything worked, everything except the one thing that mattered, keeping the man in the boat together. The search went on for 2 more days, but everyone standing on those decks already knew. On the 12th of February, they called it off. Andrew McAuley was presumed dead. His body has never to this day been found. So what actually happened out there in the dark? This is where I have to be careful, because nobody truly knows. There was no witness, no body, just an upturned boat and a few broken seconds of garbled radio. Everything after this is reconstruction, the coroner's best careful guess. The New Zealand coroner's inquest concluded that Andrew drowned on or about the 9th of February, when he became accidentally separated from his capsized kayak. The picture they painted: southwesterly winds around 25 knots, short, vicious chop, a capsize, a broken pod arm making it hard to right the boat, a water bladder on the deck throwing off the balance. And then, exhausted, reaching for his radio to call for help, the boat slips away from him. In that water, without the kayak, a person has minutes, not hours, minutes. One of his own weather advisors put it more bluntly. He said, and I'm quoting, "I have no doubt that a wave got him. A single rogue wave on the notorious approach to Milford Sound." So back to the question I asked you at the start. How does a man that careful vanish within sight of the finish? And the horrible human answer seems to be this: he did almost everything right. He just ran out of one thing: margin. After 30 days, there was nothing left in the tank when the sea finally came for him. Back home, Vicky was waiting with Finley. The husband who cried on camera because he was scared he'd never see them again was right. She later wrote a memoir about him and the voyage. She called it simply Solo. Because here's the thing, Andrew filmed all of it. Every lonely night, every storm, that heartbreaking goodbye. In 2008, that footage became a documentary, also called Solo. So the man who disappeared without a trace somehow left the most complete record imaginable of exactly who he was and what it cost him. He is gone, and yet he's still right there on the screen, paddling into the dark. And I keep coming back to little Finley, 3 years old, waving from the shore. Bye, Daddy. A whole life he'll only ever know his father through a camera the man left running. We like to say people who die like this were chasing a dream. But Andrew wasn't running toward a record. He was a father who wanted to touch the impossible once and then come home. The sea only let him do half of that. So picture it one last time, that tiny kayak, that black water, the mountains he'd bled for, finally in sight. And here's the one thing I can't stop turning over, and I'll leave it with you. In those final seconds, watching his boat drift away, do you think Andrew knew how close he actually was? Or did he die believing he was 30 out, almost home? I don't have an answer for that one. Maybe that's the point. This channel is just me, one person, digging up stories like Andrew's and telling them the best I can. If this one stayed with you, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.